Try as I might, I just couldn't find a way to keep running back Kendre Miller on the active roster. We got all that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst at WWL TV. And on today's episode, we're taking a look at my final 53-man roster projection after making some updates following Sunday's preseason loss to the Tennessee Titans. Maybe solidified some things that I was a little bit on the fence about, stuff like that. So we're going to dive into all that. I'm going to tell you why I can't keep Rico Payton off of this roster, why I think Dallin Holker still makes the roster despite dealing with injury over the course of the past couple of weeks. And I'm going to explain to you why Kendre Miller just could not find a spot on my final 53-man roster projection, but his opportunity isn't over. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can put $5 down and get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We appreciate you very much for being here. I just couldn't find a way to keep running back Kendre Miller on the roster when I did this final 53-man roster projection. That was probably my first big kind of change from my one before the final preseason game to after the final preseason game. I looked at quarterback. The only thing that was different for me was moving Spencer Rattler up ahead of Jake Haener. I think he's got to be QB2. He's got to be the backup that you're willing to put on the field if Derek Carr deals with any injury or heck has to come off to the sideline to tie his shoe. But I understand the comfort of a Jake Haener, the familiarity of a Jake Haener. Both selections make sense, but I just don't know how you pass up on Spencer Rattler. But we covered that in yesterday's episode, so feel free to go back and check that out. I want to start off with the running back spot here. And I also want to acknowledge that there's no good time to do this on cut day. It's a crappy day. Almost 1,000 people are going to lose a job or be traded or something like that. That's going to massively change their lives and impact their families. So I just want to mention that as we're discussing players that won't make the roster, we're not doing it in a way that is to say, haha, you didn't make the roster. We're discussing what has to happen in the NFL, which is an unfortunate business sometimes. And this is one of the most unfortunate days. It sucks. But these guys are all going to get more opportunities, hopefully, or some of them will continue to get opportunities with practice squad, phone calls from, organizations later on when they deal with certain things and need to adjust their roster, whatever. But really, really important, really important that we kind of acknowledge that before we dive in here. So I'm looking at Kendre Miller, and I've got him on the outside looking in. This is an update. Last week, I kept 4 running backs for the team because this offensive coordinator was a part of a team last year that kept 5 running backs, including a fullback. So I had them keeping 4 running backs with no fullback here on my initial projection. I'm keeping that roster count as of right now. I actually almost bumped it up to 5 running backs being kept, but I toned myself back. I went with 4, and those 4 are Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Jordan Mims, and Jacob Kibodi. Maybe I'm buying into a little bit of the preseason hype with the final preseason game, but I was close to putting Jacob Kibodi on the initial projection as well. The big difference for me was that we have seen him improve and improve and improve, and then watching him in not just the run game, but in pass protection, being able to contribute from multiple areas as well, including special teams. All of those things end up making a big impact if you're a guy like Jacob Kibodi or for a guy like Jacob Kibodi. So I've got him making the roster. We'll see if the Saints will go that far. I don't know if they will. Him ending up on the practice squad would be just as good for him, and everything like that all can work. I've got Jordan Mims making the roster because he contributes to you as a runner. He's very comfortable in the system. He's a good receiving back. He also returns kicks for the team, covers kicks for the team, literally does everything that he has to make a roster. And so therefore I can't keep him off the roster. With Kendre Miller, I could not get him to the active 53-man roster. So I utilized the NFL's new rule, which allows you to place 2 players on injured reserve at roster cuts without ending their season. So I put him there and then gave him the opportunity to come back in 4 weeks, see where things are. He's going to have a 3-week practice window after that point, can get back out onto the field when he's comfortable, give him an opportunity to prove something. I think he deserves the opportunity to at least show something. And he hasn't gotten the chance to show anything yet with the injuries. I know the injuries typically show you something, a little bit of a something, but I think he deserves an opportunity to be out on that field and at least get a look. And he would have 3 weeks of a practice window that doesn't count against the Saints 53-man roster to show that, and then the Saints can make any decision with him they want after that. That's the way that I went about running back. James Robinson, you have to get back on the practice squad if you can. You can get 6 veterans back on your practice squad. That's the way to do it. So that's what I'm looking at for the running back position. It's a little bit of a change for me. Listen, I should also mention that, like, as I'm recording this, I'm checking things, making sure that, I'm catching any moves that are happening or getting any texts or anything like that. So just keep an eye out on the fact that, look, there might be opportunities that, we'll have news that will break or something like that throughout, or I'll say something in this episode that either gets proven to be really smart or really stupid by the time that it actually premieres. We'll see. Okay, one piece of news that already came out here from Nick Underhill of New Orleans Football. Khalen Saunders expected to miss a couple of weeks with a calf injury. So remember, he was not out at the preseason game last week because of that calf injury. He was kind of solemn after that Friday press conference. Maybe that explains a little bit about what was going on there. But Khalen Saunders not able to, it's going to miss a couple of weeks. We'll see what that means. If he's going to miss more than 4 weeks, or if he's going to miss 4 weeks, then there's an opportunity for the Saints to put him on that injured reserve spot, or they can carry him over to the roster and then give some opportunities to a guy like Jack Heflin, who I think has looked pretty good and continued to develop with the team. So we'll circle back to that when we get over to the defensive side. I want to continue on with the offensive side here for just a moment to quickly highlight wide receiver. I still have the team keeping the same 5 wide receivers as my initial projection: Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Cedric Wilson, A.T. Perry, Bub Means. That's where I think you go. I think there's a chance that if the Saints keep 6 wide receivers, Equinemius St. Brown or Samson Nakua could be a shoe-in for that spot, both of which being able to contribute on the special team side, both of which being able to contribute on the blocking side. I think all that ends up helping quite a bit. So that would be the other thing that I would watch here, is how many wide receivers the team keeps. I have them keeping no fullbacks right now because you don't have to keep a fullback on your roster to use one. You're able to keep that guy on the practice squad, elevate them for 3 games. You could use Taysom Hill as your fullback. And there's another guy that can play fullback as well, and that is tight end Dallin Holker, who, even though he hasn't been seen when it comes to the San Francisco game nor the Tennessee Titans game, I still think makes the roster. Let me tell you why as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, over at FanDuel, they have an entire page dedicated to just the New Orleans Saints. Favored by 4 points up against the Carolina Panthers to open the season. Over-under set at 40.5 points. Alvin Kamara, is he going to score 5 rushing touchdowns and 5 receiving touchdowns in the regular season? You can take the yes or no on that. 5+ interceptions for Tyrann Mathieu, and much more. And so I want you to go and check them out, especially now, because right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with your established YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to get every regular season out-of-market Sunday afternoon game. All you need is a Google account, a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So to get started today, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, family, if you ask me, even though he missed 2 of the 3 preseason games, I still think Dallin Holker, New Orleans Saints undrafted free agent tight end out of Colorado State, has done enough to make the roster at tight end. We appreciate you very much for being here and for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, for your second listen today, to go and check out Vinny and Michelle over at Locked On Fantasy Football every Monday through Friday, delivering all of the fantasy football advice that you need to be the smartest player in your leagues. Go and check them out today, every single Monday through Friday. Locked On Fantasy Football, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So on today's show, we're taking a look at my adjustments to my final 53-man roster. And one adjustment that I didn't make, and the adjustment that I did not make was at tight end. I didn't change where I had it originally standing. Don't worry if you didn't see the initial. I'm about to tell you. All good. I'm going to catch you up. So I have at tight end, Juwan Johnson, Foster Morrow, and then still Dallin Holker. I just don't think that there's another tight end, even in Dallin Holker's absence over the course of the last couple of weeks, right? That includes 2 preseason games and a week of practice ahead of the Tennessee Titans. I don't think that any tight end has stepped up and taken that role away from him. And it was going to be tough to do that anyway. The New Orleans Saints look at Dallin Holker as their, quote, eighth round draft pick. They love him. They want to keep him. They like him. They want him to contribute. And they have a vision for him in terms of what he's going to be when he's healthy and when he understands the offense. I was told by one person within the organization that they believe that once Dallin Holker figures out the offense, he's going to be, quote, special. Like, they feel really, really good about him. So they're excited about him. And no other tight end really stood up and took the mantle away from Dallin Holker as the third tight end in this roster. And the nice thing about this, too, is that when it comes to Holker being the third tight end, he's really kind of the fourth tight end, isn't he? Like, if we're being honest, because Taysom Hill is going to get more reps than any third tight end on the roster, probably at the very position, although Taysom Hill will also play in the backfield and out wide and in the slot and all these other things. Michael Jacobson had a real opportunity and was given a couple of chances up against the Tennessee Titans, but then had the big drop over the middle, had a couple of big-time penalties in the special teams kicking game, especially at an end-of-game situation that ended up burning nearly 20 full seconds off the clock when you only had a minute and 25 seconds left to go. He had the illegal formation penalty first on the kickoff. Then he had the holding penalty on the kickoff, forced the team to go back to the 15-yard line by the time it was all said and done. Not a great series for him. So I think those things speak volumes in terms of everybody's comfort with a player and all these other things. And we hear all the time about discipline and penalties and weeding all that stuff out and making sure that you're not costing a teammate a big play or costing your team a touchdown or a score or even the opportunity to just be in good field position to start a drive that you need a score on, which is exactly what happened with Michael Jacobson ahead of that final closing drive. So I just don't feel that anybody has really come out and said, all right, well, while Dallin Holker is out, that's mine. I'm going to snatch that up. Holker has taken first team reps from the very beginning of camp. He was a guy that was expected to play more in that second preseason game against the San Francisco 49ers, but sprained his ankle before the game began. The Saints had a similar situation with another tight end and they moved on. And so it's just one of those pieces that you just want to see where this thing heads, where it goes with Dallin Holker. And I think that is a worthwhile investment, especially if you truly believe as highly in Dallin Holker as the organization claims that they do. If what they're saying is true, then I think that Dallin Holker still makes this roster. Juwan Johnson, Foster Morrow, of course, ahead of him. No big surprises there. All right, let's take a look at the offensive line here. One small change to the offensive line for me. Taliesin Fuanga is your starter at left tackle. Lucas Patrick is your starter at left guard. Eric McCoy is your starter at center. Cesar Ruiz is your starter at right guard. Trevor Penning is your starter at right tackle. That's the way that I see this all going. I love the way that John Stinchcomb talked about it, former New Orleans Saints offensive line, over with Matt Moscona on ESPN Baton Rouge after further review. He mentioned that he saw some improvements in Trevor Penning from game 1 to game 2, from game 2 to game 3. I still saw a lot of things that concerned me personally, in game 3. But were there some improvements and were there some improved plays? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a clip floating around of him absolutely demolishing a defensive end, creating what John Stinchcomb called college-sized holes when it came to the run game and everything like that. And of course, we have to consider the run game in his evaluation, but the pass blocking game for me just hasn't really taken the strides that you'd like to see from your starting right tackle. And what I love about what John Stinchcomb said, which was very honest and I think very fair, was there have been improvements in Trevor Penning's game, but he's still not sure that he's seeing starting caliber play from the right tackle. And I think that is fair. The other thing that is fair is that we haven't seen starting caliber play from anyone that has played at right tackle so far. So therefore, the starting right tackle job is going to be Trevor Penning's because he has the biggest upside. He has the opportunity to be able to go out there and a switch flip, and then all of a sudden, okay, this is the guy that they intended to draft in the first round. You're going to roll that dice 10 times out of 10 before you're going to roll the dice on somebody else, one of the veterans or one of the young players or anything like that. And John Stinchcomb, I thought, did a good job kind of laying that out. I wanted to echo that and share my agreement in that, because I think that's exactly what we have seen so far this offseason. We've seen improvements from Trevor Penning, not improvements that yet get him to being a consistent and reliable starting right tackle in the NFL. And nor have we seen anybody challenge and show that they can be better at the position. In fact, we talked about that on a show about 2 weeks ago. And so that to me is a really fair assessment of where the Saints are when it comes to Trevor Penning and the starting right tackle position. Now, the Saints could potentially go outside of their organization to add another right tackle. Those opportunities will already be there, but my projections are based on who's on the roster right now. So I have the Saints still keeping 9 offensive linemen because I think you need that many. People are going to get injured. You're not sure you have a real starter at right tackle. You got to have the depth. So I've got Landon Young, Oli Udoh, Kyle Hergel, and Tremaine Ankrum as the backups on the tackle side. Landon Young gives you tackle and guard versatility. He's the new James Hurst. Oli Udoh gives you tackle and guard versatility as well. Kyle Hergel gives you versatility on the interior, and then Tremaine Ankrum also gives you stuff within, versatility within the interior as well. And he's also only allowed 1 hurry on like 65 pass blocking snaps. He's been one of the Saints' best offensive linemen over the course of the preseason. Ankrum had, which was really surprising. So yeah, he stays on the roster. But if the Saints go out there and find somebody, pick up somebody on waivers or something like that over the course of the next couple of days, expect one of these guys to be out the door. If they can get somebody in, that's going to be of more valuable depth. You're not going to find a starter. You're just not. You're not going to find a starter because no team's cutting their starters at roster cuts when it comes to right tackle. Now, you might find somebody whose tools you really like, somebody that maybe has some familiarity with the coaching staff. They feel like, okay, maybe we can get something there, whatever, but you're probably looking at depth at that point. I have Nick Saldiveri on injured reserve. He's taking the other preseason injured reserve designated spot at roster cuts for right now because we just don't know where his progress is when it comes to his injury. But that's the way I'm looking at it over on the offensive line. All right, coming up next, I finally found a way to keep Rico Payton on the roster, and it didn't come without casualty, but I think that it's a must because I don't know how you leave the young cornerback off of this roster. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation, the New Orleans Saints. I don't know how you can justify keeping Rico Payton, the Pittsburgh State cornerback, off of the roster. I had to put him back on my 53. Let's take a look at the updates over on the defensive side as we wrap up our look at my final 53-man roster projection. We appreciate you very much for being here. Don't forget, we'll be back later on today. Saints are going to have practice in the afternoon. We'll speak with Dennis Allen, and then right after that, I'll do a live show that kind of breaks down some stuff on the roster, maybe some of the surprises, things like that. And then we'll get to a review of the full roster in tomorrow morning's episode on Wednesday. So lots of good stuff coming. Just a heads up, I'm traveling at the end of this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Going to go and see my family before games and practices and all that stuff start. So I'll miss a couple of practices this week, but I'll make sure you have all the information that you need. If there's anything big, we'll bring somebody in that was there. But I'm going to go see my parents because I love them and family first. All right, so look, cornerback, man, I had to do it. Last time when I did this 53-man roster projection, I went with the top 4, Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Alante Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry. And then I went with Shamar John Charles, and I left Rico Payton off because Payton was dealing with an injury at that time. He was dealing with a shoulder injury, wasn't out on the field. So I wanted to wait and see how that went. Then he comes out, he gets a sack up against the Tennessee Titans, and then doesn't see a single target go his way because his coverage was that nice throughout the night. And so I put him on the roster, and I just added him in. I just made it 6 cornerbacks and 5 safeties as opposed to 5 cornerbacks and 6 safeties. Used to be that you would keep the extra safety because you wanted that versatility in terms of the contribution to the special teams game, but also versatility of a guy that might be able to play in multiple spots. Think about PJ Williams when he transitioned over to safety, for instance, things like that. Not sure you necessarily need that anymore thanks to a recent free agency acquisition, so we'll get to that. So I've got the Saints keeping 6 corners: Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Alante Taylor. Those are your starters with Alante Taylor in the slot. Kool-Aid McKinstry as well, who's expected to be ready to go week 1, but unlikely really to be called upon into action week 1. I think would be kind of good for him. Shamar John Charles, who also gives you another gunner, gives you a good special teams player, all that other stuff, in addition to solid play out of all the corners in the preseason that took at least 70 pass coverage snaps, John Charles allowed the second lowest completion percentage at just 40%, 4 of 10 targets. So very good preseason for him. And then Rico Payton, outstanding, 39% forcing completion percentage, one of the highest amongst people targeted as often as he was, 13 targets over the first 2 games. So he was the highest, most targeted player in the first 2 weeks of the preseason, but then had only allowed 3 catches during that time. So like a 23% completion percentage allowed, like just outstanding. So can't keep him off the roster. I just can't do it. So I've got Rico Payton and John Charles both making the roster. The odd man out because of that becomes Ugo Amadi. And I think you make it a priority to get Ugo back onto the practice squad because he does so much for you. Personal protector, special teams coverage, can back up in the slot. But now you've got John Charles, who also can back up in the slot and all these other things. So it just creates a little bit of roster flexibility. So I would say that Ugo probably would be like one of the top players that you pursue for the practice squad if this were to happen. I hated cutting him off the roster because I think that he does a lot of good things for this team. But it's a numbers game at the end of the day. Tyrann Mathieu, Jonathan Abram, I think those are your starters. Jordan Howden, Will Harris makes the roster, and then JT Gray. I mentioned earlier that the versatility of a specific free agent addition will help out a ton when it comes to the cut down that I did for safety and corner. Well, Will Harris is that guy. Can play roaming safety for you. Can play down in the box. Can play in the slot. Heck, he can play corner for you if you need him to. Guy can do everything, and he's played in this type of system before because of the fact that he spent the last few years with the Detroit Lions, which was, of course, pioneered and is being run by a couple of former New Orleans Saints staffers, and Aaron Glenn, and then, of course, the head coach there, and Dan Campbell. So gets the culture, gets the scheme, fits right in. So I think that he ends up stealing that spot. All right, let's go back down to the defensive line here. And this is because I want to update now with the Khalen Saunders injury. I still think Khalen Saunders probably makes the roster. The question is he going to miss 4 or more games, or is he going to miss less than 4 games? Like, is he expected to miss less than 4 weeks? And with the bonus week in between, there's a little bit of value here because being out for a couple of weeks, if that's 3 weeks, that's 2 games, right? Because you're including this week in that number. Yeah, so we'll see exactly how everything goes. But if he's expected to miss 3 or fewer games, then I think you just carry him on the roster. It doesn't matter. If he is expected to miss 4 or more games, then you might consider putting him on injured reserve. You'd also carry him over on the active roster after cuts today, and then, move him to injured reserve at a later point if you needed to. So my defensive line otherwise doesn't change. Cameron Jordan, Carl Granderson, Chase Young, Peyton Turner. I still have Isaiah Foskey making this roster. I'll tell you why in a moment, but those are your 5 edge rushers. And then Khalen Saunders, Nathan Shepard, Bryan Bresee, Khristian Boyd. Khristian Boyd really gets the opportunity here to step up and get a lot more reps, a lot more action because of the fact that he would be stepping into Khalen Saunders' role, because Khalen can play from 0 up to 3 tech. So can Khristian Boyd. So you get a good run stopper in there that's able to kind of mix and match with guys like Bryan Bresee and Nathan Shepard. But then you got to figure out, is it going to be Jack Heflin? Is it going to be Kendall Vickers? Both of which have had pretty nice camps. They're not guys that are going to be superstars or anything like that coming out of camp, but they've had nice camps. They haven't been liabilities for this team over on the defensive line at all. And so one of those guys ends up stepping into that next role. You imagine it's Jack Heflin because he also spent all of last season with the practice squad. So the Saints typically are pretty loyal to that kind of a thing. But we'll see. Kendall Vickers had some impressive moments as well. And I believe split a sack with Isaiah Foskey in this last game. So that's where I see things going. Isaiah Foskey stays on this team. I just don't see the Saints being impatient enough to move on from him, everything like that. Dennis Allen said, and I quote, I certainly see a vision for this guy helping us on special teams. I think that, so I think you still have a young player that still needs to develop, but I think that he's taken a step forward from where he was at this point last year. So 2 key things in there: contributing on special teams and having a present vision for the player. The way that he said that in present tense, that meant something. The fact that he talked about him improving from this point last year to this year. And then he also said at a separate time that being a drafted player does indeed give you an edge at some point. Not something you're used to hearing a Saints coach acknowledge. Sean Payton was always about it doesn't matter how you got here. Everybody starts at 0, blah, 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 everything like that. And Dennis Allen kind of acknowledging what is probably more true, which is, hey, if you're a drafted player, you get a little bit of an edge here. And so all 3 of those boxes you check for Isaiah Foskey, I think he makes the roster still. And he's somebody that's probably not going to be asked to do a lot when it comes to the pass rush. And then if one of the top 3 guys gets injured, you're going to have to add somebody for depth purposes anyway. And maybe that person that you add for depth purposes leaps Isaiah Foskey when it comes to pass rushing stuff so that Foskey can focus on the special team stuff. We'll see. We'll see where it all goes, but that's the way that I expect that to go. No changes right now at linebacker. Demario Davis, Pete Werner, Willie Gay. Those are your 3 top guys. Anthony Orji is your next immediate dude, can play every position, all that. Khaleke Hudson is the next one that I have on there, who's a special teams ace for you, has starting experience in the NFL. If DeMarco Jackson is healthy, though, I think he ends up getting that spot. And then finally, when it comes to kicker and punter, I just don't see the team moving on from Blake Grupe or Lou Hedley. Charlie Smith right now dealing with groin tightness. Interestingly timed situation there, where he didn't get an opportunity to kick at all during the course of the last week. So then Blake Grupe got all the kicks. Blake Grupe is your kicker. And Blake Grupe had a solid preseason outing to wrap up season as well, which I thought was good. And then as for punter, we now know who won that battle. According to my triplet over at NewOrleans.football, Lou Hedley has been released, meaning rookie punter Matt Hayball is the new punter, the lefty, Aussie coming in. Look, I thought if I was making the decision, this is the decision that I would have made. I didn't think that the Saints were going to make this decision. I thought they were going to be cozy with the operation, cozy with what they felt was consistency from Lou Hedley. But I just think that the beautiful ball that you get from Matthew Hayball, the hang time that you get there, and the fact that he has fit into the operation. John Hendricks and I from Second and Saints were watching very closely as Matthew Hayball actually did a lot of the holding for Blake Grupe, pregame, all these other things, kind of indicated that maybe they were at least getting an extra look there at the operation. But Lou Hedley, who is, I will tell you, a phenomenal dude, absolutely phenomenal dude, but ends up not being able to hold on to his incumbent role as punter. And Matthew Hayball will be the future for the New Orleans Saints at that punter spot. So a big thing to watch when it comes to the Saints 2024 NFL season. There will be another new punter here for Dennis Allen and the New Orleans Saints, but I think the Saints might have made the right decision. And then Zach Wood, the safest guy on the roster, no matter what any Madden ratings have to say about it. All right, y'all, we appreciate you very much. Don't forget, we'll do another show later on today once I get home from the Saints facility, go over roster cuts, big moves, all those other things. Let me check to see if there's any other big moves that have happened that I have missed while I have been recording. I see nothing. So that's good. All right, we appreciate you, and we'll have a fresh episode for you tomorrow with a little bit more of a deep dive into the roster and where we can see some additional changes coming. Because remember, this is all that happens today is the initial 53-man roster. Things change over the course of the next couple of weeks like crazy. So we appreciate you very much, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.